It's just another day in the life as a military wife, and I thought to mix things up, I would share some quotes with you and see if you could guess what today's topic was about. All right, let's get started. Change is what people do when they have no options left. Holly Black. If you want to make enemies, try to change something. Woodrow Wilson. It is not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. W. Edwards Deming. The only difference between a rut and a grave is their dimension. Ellen Velasco. Our ability to adapt is amazing. Our ability to change is not quite so as spectacular. Lisa Luntz. And the last one, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they are exactly like the old ones. Charles F. Kettering. If you haven't guessed it, we're going to be talking about adaptation and resiliency today. Honestly, those are things that I think are important for anyone, but they really do apply to military families as well. And we're going to get into a lot of things that might help you in that way. This is your host, Sam Wolf, and you're listening to Life of a Military Wife. So let's dig into today's topic a little bit. But basically, change, stress, those sorts of things are facts of life. There are things that everyone has to deal with. Well, I guess you don't have to. You can choose not to deal with them. But adaptation and resiliency are choices. They're things that we can learn and choose to do. And like I had mentioned previously, I got my degree in family life science, and I chose to take a whole lot of classes on human development because I thought that was fascinating. I really like cognitive development and speech development and all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, nerd, but I love it. I think it's great to understand how and why people develop the way they are. It's helped me be a lot more understanding and compassionate with other people around me, and also to understand myself and understand how to be more effective in my own life. And one of the classes I took that has ended up being very, very beneficial was adaptation and resiliency. And the format the teacher used was rather unique. And we used the textbook. It was the 4th edition of Families and Change, Coping with Stressful Events and Transitions. The editors were Sharon J. Price, Christina A. Price, and Patrick C. McHenry. And I really loved it. In it, they covered what's called the ABCX model, which was developed by Hill R. in 1958. And they adapted to a whole lot of different family situations, and they really go in and define and explain things really well. If you really want to, go ahead, explore the textbook, pull it up. It's fine. I recommend it. But I'm going to break it down for you right now. The basic premise of the whole class was built around mostly this one model. It's called the ABCX model. And sadly, because this is a podcast, I can't show you the picture right now, but I will try to get an image for the description so that you guys can kind of gauge what the heck I'm talking about. If not, I will definitely be posting one on the Facebook page. But the different factors are labeled as A, events and stressors, B, resources, C, perceptions, and X is the degree of stress. So in our life, at all times, we have all 4 factors. We have events and situations that are going on. We have resources. We have our own perceptions of those situations. And we have X, which is the degree of stress in our life. And we can have, based on how we use everything and how everything interacts, we can either have high or low stress. And when we get into high stress, it can cause crises. Or crises. Ha! That's what I meant to say. Anyway, but it can cause crises in our life. And I think I'm saying that right. Anyway, but if you look at this picture, A is a circle, B is a circle, C is a circle, and X is a circle. And they all are connecting to each other because every single one of those factors interacts with each other in our lives and affects how all of the other things work. And I want to give you a story or an example of how I've seen this because sometimes it can just seem really clinical and abstract. And I had taken this class in college. I really liked it. I found it very interesting. Sometimes the way the teacher presented it, it didn't always feel as accessible as I'd like, but I did learn a lot. Fast forward 2 years and I'm married. I have a kid. My husband is leaving for basic. We are in between jobs, and so we're staying with family until he gets his first paycheck. I feel like my life is out of control and I am super stressed. And I was kind of throwing a little bit of a pity party. Okay, just to be completely sincere, I was throwing a bit of a pity party, wondering why me, why now, why this, why that. And as we were unpacking our storage unit and trying to figure out what we were going to keep in storage and what we were going to keep with us, I ran into my old textbook. Part of the reason why I've kept them, the Family and Change textbook. And it kind of hit me like a smack upside the head. It was like a little neon sign. Hey, you actually know how to handle this. You've got the resources. Let's do something. And so my little neon sign went off as, why don't we quit the pity party and actually be productive here? And I started to flip through my old textbook and I realized something really profound. I had a bunch of new events and stressors in my life. We were transitioning from the civilian world to the military world. My husband was at this point in basic. I had a kid, and I found out literally like right as my husband left for basic, like literally they took his phone and like the next day or so found out I was pregnant, like right after. So we were expecting our second, woohoo, and I couldn't tell him right away because snail mail and all of that. Anyway, because we've been in that long. But I saw this and I started to realize, okay, you know what? I have skills, I have training, I have information. And I realized, yes, I have all these stressors, these events that are happening in my life, but what else do I have? What resources do I have? And I started to go through all the resources I had. And I realized I actually had quite a lot of resources. I had extended family who were being supportive, who I had moved closer to so that I wouldn't be by myself. I didn't have to worry about holding down a job because we were getting some help from family, and then my husband's first paycheck came and I was able to get an apartment next to family and take care of that sort of stuff. I did know some other people in the military because my husband and I both have other family members in the military. And I was able to kind of pick their brains about what would be productive and what were some of the best ways to prepare. So I realized I actually had quite a lot of resources. And so I was kind of puzzled why my stress level was so high and why it felt almost to a crisis point. And I had insurance, so I didn't have to worry about the pregnancy or my child's health care. We had plenty of food. We had a house. Like we had everything we really needed. And then I got to, oh, wait a second, perception. And perception really hit hard for me in that instance because I realized my pity party was a huge, in this specific situation for me, my pity party was the reason why I was so stressed. Because I felt like, woe is me, this is unfair. Why do I have to go through this? And that was a wake-up call for me, realizing that my perception was really the problem in this case. And I kind of had a little wake-up call, a little, just I had to have a paradigm shift. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with 7 Habits, but paradigm shifts are just Anyway, it's something I can get into later, but it's a very useful thing sometimes to realize that your perspective needs to change. And I started to think about everyone I knew who had served in the military. And because my husband and I are relatively interested in history, and specifically, I've always had a fascination for family history, which I've talked about before. I started to research my military family history. And as I did that, I started to realize how blessed I was, how lucky I was to live in this day and age. I have a 4 or 5 times great grandmother who my grandfather served in the Mexican American War, and he had to leave her and the kids behind, and she was pregnant at the time. And back then, if you were enlisted, you didn't always get paid regularly, and sometimes you didn't even get paid until the war was done. She had no way of communicating or knowing where her husband was. She had to weave cloth and stuff just to provide for her children, and she had little to no family around. So when I started to stop and think about that, I'm like, I have a roof over my head. I have income coming in. I've got health care for my child and myself. I can write my husband. And then when he got into AIT, I could call him occasionally. I knew exactly where he was. I knew he was in a, fairly safe situation as long as he was being smart. And I realized, okay, this is not as big of a deal as I've worked myself up to believe. It's not easy. It was a challenge. There were good days and there were bad, but it was doable. I could do this. And when I had that change of mind, everything got better. And so I wanted to kind of share what I learned in my class and what I learned with this to help you understand the whole reason why I even started this podcast. I started this because I started to see reflected in some of the new military wives I was meeting, some of those same feelings and emotions and experiences, the uncertainty, the stress, the dislike of change, not knowing where to find information and resources. And I realized we've been in for a while. We've been a military family for a bit now. I have some experience with finding resources. I'm still learning, obviously, but I could share what I know with those around me, and I could share what I know through this podcast with people who may be new military families or may have family members in the military and want to understand them better, or people who just, want to know more about military life. And that is the whole premise of why I started my podcast. I wanted it to be a resource, which is B in that model. So we all know what events and situations are that can cause stress. We've had a lot of them in our lives. And they have different parameters, different ways that they can stress us out. And I'm not going to go into all the legal technical terms and jargon, but basically, an event and stressor is basically classified by their intensity and their hardship to the family. So it's an occurrence that provokes a variable amount of change to the family system. So something that causes change, something that is unpredictable, and something that can cause hardship. And that's what a stressor is. Everyone can imagine. I mean, I'm sure PCSing, moving, getting your kids into school, dealing with a deployment, dealing with a hardship tour. You've got hardship right built into that one. It's like the Army knew what they were doing, or the military in general knew what they were doing when they named that a hardship tour. You've got all just different things that can happen even in normal life for people who are not military. The death of a loved one, birth of a new child can be stressful. Moving in general, changing jobs, medical illnesses, disease, a lot of different things. Heavens knows that COVID was definitely a stressor event for a lot of people. In fact, I think pretty much everyone. And so after we get to stressor events, it's really important to know what those resources are. And I feel like that's part of the reason why there was a lot of confusion and stress over, for example, COVID in the beginning, is a lot of people there weren't a lot of resources and people didn't know where the resources were. I know for me, getting into the military and understanding my resources, it took a lot of work. It took a lot of asking questions and getting on websites and talking to other military spouses, figuring out things like DEERS and figuring out, which is something you have to, it's a database. It's fun. Figuring out TRICARE, which is the medical health care, figuring out, to live on or off post, just a whole bunch of lots of little decisions thrown into this one big decision of becoming a military family. And I realized the more I researched, the more it helped. And that's one of the reasons why I like to cover a lot of different resources in this podcast, so that you can find out if you're dealing with burn pit stuff, you have medical conditions, or a family member has medical conditions due to the burn pits. I want you to know where that is. If you are living in military housing and you're having issues, I want you to know what your rights are. If you're trying to navigate military life and you don't know what resources are out there, understanding what the MWR has to offer is great. Or utilizing what your library or whatever has is just really important. And that's one reason why I've covered the topics I've covered. So the next thing is back to C, which is perception. And I've talked a little bit about perception, and we all pretty much know what resources are. So I'm going to skip, like I said, that one. But when it comes down to perception, and I talked about a paradigm shift. And I'm not sure how many of you, and I may have made this, reference in the past, but how many of you have seen that image of the dress on social media? It went viral, and it had people really confused, because some people thought it was like gold and some people thought it was like black and white or silver or something, just based on what they saw. But if you looked at it long enough and you could kind of change the way you were looking at it, you would realize that it could be either. You could see either color scheme. There's another one. It's an ink blot sort of thing. And if you look at it, some people will see an old woman and some people will see a young woman, just based on the negative, whether you're focusing in more on the white of the ink blot or the black of the ink blot. That when we can actually change the way our brain literally sees the situation or what we're looking at, that's called a paradigm shift. And it's not easy, but it has been immensely useful for me, because it has allowed me to step back and look at my life situations from someone else's perspective, and to reflect and put what I'm dealing with, reframe it or frame it in a way that helps me find a solution. Because that's really the thing. It's finding answers to our problems and taking charge of the situations that are in our lives. So the definition that they give to this is clarifying the issues, hardships, and tasks to render them more manageable and responsive to the problem-solving efforts, decreasing the intensity of the emotional burden associated with the stressors, encourages the family unit to carry on with its fundamental tasks of promoting the individual member's social and emotional development. And that definition was put together by McKibben and Peterson in their 1985 research study, I believe. Again, I'm taking everything pretty much out of the one textbook that I was telling you about. So I will put the information about that textbook if you want to look it up. But basically, when we can reframe and decrease the emotional intensity of the burdens we're feeling, we're able to find those solutions more readily. I'm terribly paraphrasing this, but basically, and I'm going to probably, totally blank on who said this, but it's hard, and I've talked about this before, it's hard to solve problems with the same level of thinking that they were created. And I'm pretty sure that was Einstein. And I've referenced it before. But we have to raise our level of thinking. We have to open our minds, look at things from different perspectives so that we can be able to see solutions. And the last thing I want to talk about is the degree of stress. So, what determines whether or not we are able to adapt or we are in a crisis mode? When we are in a crisis, it's because we've had a disturbance of the equilibrium that is so overwhelming, and the pressures that are so severe, and the change is so acute that the family system is blocked, immobilized, and incapacitated. So that's when we get into the crisis mode. That's when we basically just shut down. And we've all had those moments where we just feel so overwhelmed and we can't focus, and it feels like our brain is just not working, and we're stressed and tense. It's hard to think clear. It's hard to be able to see options. For me, I know that personally, like I've said before, I know that when I get into that frame of mind, I need some alone time. Sometimes I need a nap. I just need to be able to clear my brain. And then usually when I've done that, I come back and reality has kind of set in, perspective has come back, and I'm able to really see things without seeing the stress first. See the situation and not the stress. Coping is defined as, or cognitive coping strategies are referred to as ways in which individual family members alter their subjective perceptions of the events. So this can include direct action, so requiring resources and learning skills can help us change our perspective. Once we realize what is available out there to help us, that sometimes alone is enough to be like, oh, okay, I got this. I'm not alone. I've got this. Other people have done this, or you know what? This isn't as bad as it could be. Same boat syndrome is a real thing, people. Another part is reframing the problem. So taking it, and I said this before, looking at it from a different perspective or putting it in a different context can really help sometimes. The other is controlling the emotions generated by the stressor. So getting social support, being able to talk to someone about your problems can oftentimes help relieve the level of stress that you are feeling in your life. And again, this is a really brief overview of a very intense topic, but it's something that has meant a lot to me because it has helped me through a lot of situations, both as a military family and just as a person. Being able to adapt is huge. So the last thing is, coping is thus a process of achieving balance in the family system that facilitates organization and unity and promotes individual growth and development. And again, I love, love, love all of the stuff in this book. It really helped open my mind. And the interesting thing that I kind of referred to previously is that when my professor first introduced this to us, instead of just having us go through this book and talk about this book, we would have a problem of the day. We'd have a stressor of the day. And each day we walked into class, he would give us a new event to deal with, and we had to apply the ABCX model to it. For example, one of the ones he gave us is divorce. Another one he gave us was a loss of a family member, basically being immigrating somewhere else, or relocation. He just a bunch of different ones, and I really liked getting thrown these different topics, and he'd use pop cultural references and different things to help us apply what we were learning to real life situations that do happen. We're going to lose loved ones. There's going to be births and deaths and sicknesses and moving and job loss and all sorts of stuff. You know what? Sometimes our kids are going to get bullied, and we're going to have to need to know how to walk them through that. If we're a military family, deployments are inevitable and hardship tours happen. And having resources, having a support system, having perspective will help us cope, will help decrease the level of stress in our lives. And we have day-to-day stress too. Getting kids to school on time, getting work projects done, keeping the house clean, paying the bills. There's always going to be stress and stressors in our lives. And so managing that is important. So I know I've talked a little bit previously in the Beyond Juggling about some different resources, tips, and tools. But again, this is a topic that's really passionate. I'm really passionate about because it's something everyone deals with, and it's something I've dealt with a lot. So I hope that you found something helpful in this. It wasn't just me rambling a lot about my life, but that you can relate to it in some ways. So thank you so much for your support and your interest. I'm really grateful for everyone who listens and supports the program. And I really do hope that this is a good resource for you, whether, like I said previously, you are a military family, or you have family that are in the military, or you just enjoy the information that is presented. I really do hope that these resources can help reduce the stress you have in your life. That said, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and this is Life of a Military Wife.